So, welcome to the Leading on Purpose podcast. My name is Nick Craig, and I'll be leading this podcast with you. My special guest today is Bill George. I've known Bill for almost 15 years. He's become a colleague and close friend, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. He's had the distinction of being a senior lecturer at Harvard Business School since 2004, where he created probably one of the most popular courses at Harvard Business School for the second year MBAs on authentic leadership. He's also been a board member at some incredible institutions ranging from Goldman Sachs to Novartis to Target to the World Economic Forum. But where I've been able to spend most of my time with him has been on the journey of writing the iconic books on authentic leadership, True North, and the most recent version called Discover Your True North, and the field guide that he and I got to write together. So Bill, thank you so much for being on this podcast.
Thank you, Nick. It's great to be with you. And thank you for all you've done to advance the whole field of authentic leadership. Your work has been really critical in helping develop more authentic leaders throughout the business world, nonprofit world, and other fields.
Well, thank you. And I have enjoyed the journey that you and I have been on. And what's interesting is that many times people will sit down with me and they'll sit down with me across from dinner and they'll say, so how is it you got to know Bill? So I have my version of the story, but I'd love to hear sort of what is your version for how did we actually end up working together?
Well, it happened, I think, in 2007, about the time that True North was coming out. I'd been doing research on this book for 2 years. I interviewed 125 leaders. And what really came out of it was really the essence of what's important is your life story, the crucibles you face, because until you understand that, you really can't understand what you're called to do, what your purpose is. And so I was creating this course, Authentic Leadership Development at Harvard Business School, which I had no idea would become as popular as it is and continue to have the run it has had. But what I thought we needed was a way for people to do deeper work on this subject on their own. We put some questions at the back, but what was really needed was some form of workbook where people could really dig in on their own, ask themselves tough questions. I also had in mind a new form of teaching, which didn't involve any faculty at all. We were the first course at Harvard to give class credit, where 55% of the time was spent in small groups with 5 of your peers, talking about important issues. But we needed a workbook to this, so you and I created this personal guide, Finding Your True North, and it took the subjects, each chapter, and allowed us to take a semester and work all the way through each of those subjects, both on your own and then to sit and discuss them with this small group of people. Because as Dan Goleman, our friend, who's the father of emotional intelligence, said, you never really understand your life story until you hear yourself telling it to someone else. And I think people said, well, don't do crucibles at the start because it's too personal, too serious. I said, no, we have to go deep. Otherwise, the group will remain at a very superficial level. And so we made that the second or third session where people had to go very deep into the most extreme experience they had in their life. And we found that was what really shaped them. Some people say, well, what about positive experience? I said, no, people are really shaped by the challenges they face when they're all alone and they have to face it on their own. And so in writing about this, people were very, very honest with themselves, but then in sharing with other people, they found I'm not alone. I'm not the only one that's had to, oh my gosh, I thought my experience was tough. Other people in my group had much tougher experiences. So that personal sharing created a bonding and an intimacy, Nick, because we don't connect at the head level, we connect at the heart. As Thich Nhat Hanh once said, the longest journey you'll ever take is the 18 inches from your head to your heart. And I think that's what we try to bring out in the course. It wasn't enough just to be a smart guy who was good and analytical and could run the numbers, run spreadsheets. You really had to know who you were at a deep level.
Well, I just wanted to thank you because um, back then, that's what you were working on. And I think you invited me, and remember as we were talking about it, and we felt like we were on the same page. And the idea of turning that into the field book was something that was your idea. And then you invited me to help you along with Andrew acclaimed to be able to create that. So it has been a very powerful journey. Now, interestingly enough, the basic architecture for what authentic leadership is and the key elements to it was something that you had pretty much figured out by the time I met you. And I'm just curious as to why purpose was part of the authentic leadership lexicon for you.
Well, since I was a little boy, I wanted to make a difference in the world. And so to me, purpose is everything. And so I started asking a lot of mentees, younger people in particular, what's the purpose of your leadership? You want to be a leader. What do you want to do? Why do you want to do it? They honestly couldn't answer the question. They gave me very superficial answers or they weren't prepared. And what we learned, yes, this is the essence, but you need to do a lot of work in order to get there. You just don't say, oh, my purpose is to save lives or to change the planet or get rid of global warming or to have worldwide peace. You really have to go into a lot of deeper work of what are you about and what are you called? It's like it's a calling is where it comes from. But until you can understand your calling, you have to go deep into who you are. And you've got to get rid of all the titles, how much money you're going to make, and how much you're going to impress the world, and go deep into yourself and find out who you are. So we finally labeled that your true north. That's the essence of who you
Right.
are. But it's your purpose is your North Star. And so when you understand your true north, you remember we had the compass. The compass really points to your North Star, which is your purpose. But until you do that inner work, have that self-awareness, know what your values are, they're really essential. And how are you going to interact with the world? How are you going to deal with and create lasting, authentic relationships? And so to do all those things first before you can really understand this is my purpose at a deeper level. So it's not a superficial thing. It's not just saying, I want to eradicate climate change. I mean, it's not that simple. So it requires a lot of hard work.
So,
And
when you were thinking about the model, because I know you had written the original book, which I really loved, which was called Authentic Leadership, which was probably my favorite book of yours because it was your personal voice. There was nobody else that was shaping it. And I was looking at what you were writing back then, and I was looking at the fact that purpose was there. But yeah, I think that, for example, without values, we don't have a true authentic leader. And with a sense of what my motivations are and my sense of self-awareness about how do I impact others. So there's a lot of elements in authentic leadership that are core essential to what it means to be an authentic leader. And why do you think, can you be an authentic leader without a clear sense of purpose?
no, I mean, that's the essence. Stephen, I think a lot of people get caught up in the demands and prestige of the outside world. Making money is not a purpose, Nick. I try to tell people today that are hoarding their money, you can't take it with you. I don't care what your religion is or if you have no religion, you can't take it with you. So having
well,
a title,
the Egyptians did try to take it with them, but
that's true.
Right?
Yeah,
As we now, good news is, because they try to take it with them, we go to museums to look at it and go, wow, that's pretty cool that they would try to take that with them.
Yes, I saw.
I think there's a Chinese emperor that took a bunch of horses with him as well, right?
Yes, exactly. But,
exactly.
I really felt that in the 90s, people were getting way too caught up in material aspects, the titles. A lot of CEOs couldn't quit because they said, without a title, I'm nothing. Gee, really? If that is, boy, you're going to have a tough last part of your life. And so you really have to think through, why are you doing all this? Why are you working 70 hours a week? This is hard work. Why are you taking slings and arrows from all over? If you don't have a sense of purpose, you're going to get really worn down. If your only sense of purpose making it, I've known people that made a lot of money, got to the top, and they said, is that all there is? I said, yeah, if that's what you're going to do, that's all there is. If it's all about title, money, prestige, and nice newspaper articles. By the way, the media will take you down as fast as they built you up. So don't get too caught up in your own press.
So now, one of my favorite stories of yours that is in the book, but I think just resonates to this whole topic, was you were driving home one day when you were an executive at Honeywell, and you had this deep epiphany, I think. I'm just wondering if you'd be willing to share with us that moment or that experience, because I feel like that was sort of where purpose sort of grabbed you and sort of shook you.
Well, it's like when you see that ugly face in the mirror and it's your own, and you realize I'm on the wrong track. I've gotten caught up. I was at Honeywell. This goes all the way back to boyhood. And part of my crucible, my story is my father wanted me to make up for his failures. So he thought, he told me flat out, son, you should be CEO of a major company. He even named the companies. I'd like you to be CEO of Coca-Cola. If that doesn't work out, how about Procter & Gamble, or emerging little computer company on the East Coast called IBM?
There's no trip there, right? I mean, my goodness.
I actually worked for all three of those companies for summer jobs. They're all great companies. They just weren't my company, but they're great companies, I would say. But I had this idea, I'm going to be CEO. So I went to Honeywell in 1978. I had built from scratch, the consumer microwave oven business at Lynn Industries when there was no industry. And it was like I was a startup within a large company. But then I went to Honeywell, had a great mentor, and had a chance to be president of Honeywell Europe. I came back and I got thrown in a bunch of turnarounds and laying off thousands, and 5,000-6,000 people here, there, elsewhere. I could do all that. In fact, I was the only one who was willing to step up and do it. That's why they kept giving them to me. By the time I got one turnaround done, they gave me another, and they gave me another. And by the way, these had like 9 divisions, 6 divisions. 9
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I looked myself in the mirror and said, wow, what are you doing? And what I was doing was running for CEO. I was grabbing for that brass ring instead of being who I was. I was even changing the way I dressed, wearing cufflinks, which I don't wear, I'm trying to make an impression, and it wasn't me. And so I went home and I realized inside I was miserable. Outside I was faking it to make it. I was going, hey, everything's great opportunity. Meanwhile, my life is actually very good. I've got a good career. My wife has a good career. We got 2 sons, one in high school, one in junior high, lots of friends. Went home and told Penny what I was feeling, and she said, Bill, I've been trying to tell you that for a year. You just refused to listen. And I was miserable inside, and I was driving so hard to overcome it. So I had to pull back and really think, is this what I want to do with my life? What is the purpose of this? If I got to the top of this great company, where would I be? Was there any purpose there? And I realized there was no purpose for me, no real purpose. I wasn't going to make a difference in the world. Making $3.91 a share for me, Nick, is not a purpose. I'm good at making numbers, but that was not a sense of purpose. And so I thought about it a lot. And I had been asked 3 times to join Medtronic. And I just turned him down for the 3rd time as the number 2 position, President Chief Operating Officer, 4 months before. So I screwed up.
Why did you turn him down? Why? Because it seemed like a pretty cool.
Well, you'll see the ego coming out here. I wanted to be CEO of a big company. Medtronic was a mid-sized company. I think the revenues that year were $750 million the year I joined. And, and
interesting.
10 times that size. So, anyway, I screwed up my courage, called the CEO and says, that job's still open. He said, well, we're about ready to fill it, but you can get in line. Well, 4 months later, I walked through the door as in the number 2 role, President Chief Operating Officer, and it was the best decision I ever made. Why? Because immediately I sensed a real sense of purpose. I had gotten together as part of my interview process in a little hotel down in Arizona with Earl Bach and the founder. That's all he talked about. He didn't even interview me. All he did was want to know, did I get the mission, as he called it.
Oh, wow, interesting.
Was to restore people to full life.
What year was this?
This is 1989. I had the flash in the mirror in 88. I joined in 89. But, we'd gotten together in early 89, and, he was talking about, how we're going to restore people to full life, alleviate pain, and extend life for many years. And he was right, and he had this vision, but he was not a manager. He needed somebody to run the company. And Win Wallen, who was then CEO, was going to retire in 2 years. So it was a great opportunity. But the company needed a lot of work. And so it was an opportunity. actually have an impact in shorter period of time than I could in a big bureaucracy. And I was frustrated by that bureaucracy. I could go to Medtronic, I could make a difference. Now I spent 13 years there, and it was the best 13 years of my business career because that sense of purpose was ever present. I did literally hundreds of meetings with employees talking about what's the purpose, and then my key question is your purpose aligned, with the company's
Right.
purpose? And if it's not,
Wow.
then what are you going to do to bring in alignment? Or maybe you're in the wrong place. You know, some guy told me, look, I'm not doing this, you know, for some kind of sense of purpose. I'm doing it to get ahead and get the title. I want your job. I said, well, that's not a worthy purpose, in my opinion.
So you were once again ahead of the curve, because back then purpose was not sexy in any way.
No, it wasn't even talked about much, you know?
Exactly. So, you know, what's interesting is that these days, I have a lot of people call me and they're like, well, we did the purpose thing, but it didn't work. I'm like, well, duh. It's like, if it's on the wall and that's where it stays, then
Yeah.
I think it's going to do. So I was just curious, when you were running Medtronics, was there some experiences or events that you felt really helped connect people to that honorable purpose? But in some ways it could be easy for it just to be on the wall someplace.
Well, easily we had a mission, a medallion ceremony where our founder, let me grab it here, gave out this medallion. It looks like this, and
Okay.
it has, you know, toward full life, and then on the back it talks about the purpose, contributing to human welfare by the application of biomedical engineering to restore life. And Earl Bakken gave me that, and he said, now remember, your purpose is not here to make money for the company or yourself, it's to do this.
Oh, great.
And so our metric at Medtronic, in all seriousness, was how many seconds go by until another person is restored to a full life by a Medtronic product. And when I went there, it was 100 seconds. Today, believe it or not, it's 2 per minute. So
2 per minute. Wow.
per minute. So a huge increase. And that's how we measure ourselves. Because if you talk to people in the production line, you talk to people in the labs, you talk to people in the field, they don't measure themselves by earnings per share. They measure themselves by how many lives they're impacting. So
Well, that's very powerful, because, you know, one of the challenges around this whole thing about organizational purpose is people go, well, that's great, but that doesn't connect to anything that's measured. But you're saying that at Medtronics, you actually had a way of measuring and knowing that all employees could say, well, here's where we are, here's the gap, and here's where we're going.
yeah, but every company should do that. You know?
Well, I agree. I mean, I think the point is that that's not the case. And I just think that the fact that you guys were working on that.
Yeah.
And if you look at your role as CEO for that period of time, I mean, do you feel like there's any particular actions or things or moments where you felt that purpose really caused you to make a different decision than if you were just looking at the numbers?
Absolutely. We had these mission medallion ceremonies that Earl did them. I did a lot of hundreds of them. But then we also had a holiday party. It was actually called the Christmas party, but we were kind of a all Christian company. I came in, and even though I'm Christian,
Whatever. These days, it's
to the holiday party and brought in other faiths, and because we really needed to do that. But anyway, we would have 6 patients come back and tell their stories, and they, I'll tell you, there were a lot of tears. They told how a Medtronic product would save their life or change their life. So I remember the first one I went to. There was a young boy who was 18 years old from Pittsburgh who had had cerebral palsy since birth. And he was now at 15 or 16. He tried twice to commit suicide because he said, I can't live like this. He's having surgery every year in June when he got out of school, go on a body cast for 8 weeks, then go back to school. So it was a terrible way to live. So he refused surgery. His body got stiff and rigid. He actually tried to commit suicide. And then all of a sudden, the doctor came up with a Medtronic drug pump. Now, the irony of this drug pump is it was on the list to be shut down because it was about $4 million a year, as all research projects do. But the company felt, we can't stand this. We need to work on pacemakers and defibrillators and stents. We can't afford to do this project. And so we saw this young man, and he, you know, I had tears in my eyes listening to him, how this had totally transformed his life. I got to know him and followed his life, and he actually came back to my retirement party 13 years later. But the interesting thing about TJ was that, we had changed his life. And so I went back and I said, so what's the problem in this business? Well, there's a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of infrastructure. And we reorganized it, put it with another business, consolidated. All of a sudden, it became very, very successful. And it's this is a neurological business, Medtronic, one of those rapidly growing business company has. But we clearly thought about purpose there, not about our profits. So we kind of stopped.
It sounds like someone showed up and voiced the purpose at that deeper level.
Yes.
So it was impossible for you not to feel it. Because I think for me, the gift of purpose isn't an intellectual exercise. It connects to your heart, and it gets back to that Thich Nhat Hanh quote you just referred to of connecting your head to your heart. In some ways, purpose is the ultimate thing that makes that connection. And that individual, was it TJ you mentioned was his name?
Yeah.
Yeah, was sort of that expression of that purpose that changed the outcome, not just for him, but for others. And in some ways, that is a beautiful expression. But I think in some sense, if you couldn't hear it, it wouldn't have mattered, right? Yeah. In some ways, you were willing to listen. And I think that's the powerful thing as a leader is, can you listen to it?
Well, I had a son the same age. And I was thinking about what's there between TJ and my son, Jeff.
Oh, wow.
Jeff, born with a healthy body. TJ was not. And, and now TJ's, gone on to do good work. But for me, it really captured, and I would tell that story as well, many other stories about what our work was everywhere I went. And this was what inspired our employees. This is not some plaque on the wall. This is in your heart. This is what touches you. So Nick, what's your purpose? And I would ask people that question. Why are you working hard in this home? Bill, do you realize how many lives we could save if we can invent this product? And people they would have little labs at home, subterranean labs at home to try to reinvent products. And, you talk to people in the field, they would drive 100 miles a night to help a doctor start a surgery the next morning at 6:30. Deliver the products. And so this became, and you talk to people on the production lines, this is, man, we could never have a quality problem because somebody might die. So they got it. Now, the irony, by the way, Nick, is I wrote a book when I left Medtronic. I had a lot of ideas about leadership. I wanted to write a book. So I wrote a book, and it was all about purpose. It was called, and it used Medtronic as an example, creating purpose, creating miracles every 10 seconds, because in those days we'd gotten it down to 10 seconds. For a new product. And interesting, publishers laughed at me and said, well, this is good for healthcare companies. Doesn't work for anyone else. And I said, really? Boy, I'll tell you, if other companies don't have a sense of purpose, if Goldman Sachs isn't committed to putting their customers' interests above all else, it's going to fail. Or Wells Fargo in the old days was very committed to helping provide financial security and increase their customers' wealth, not about signing more accounts. So, but I see every company has to have a purpose. This has nothing to do with healthcare.
Well, yeah, no, so, you have had the beautiful opportunity over the last 20 years of working with a lot of CEOs. You run the CEO Forum at Harvard Business School, writing a book right now that's about some of your insights. I think you're probably when I think of somebody who understands corporate governance and the role of a CEO, you're probably one of the world's experts in that context, as far as I know and what I've seen. And when you look at these CEOs that you've interacted with over the last 20 years, is there any of them that sort of jump out for you in the context of you really get a sense that purpose was driving them in a way that maybe not everybody else was able to pull off?
Well, someone I know really well, and too, is Paul Pullman at Unilever. He's a Dutchman that took over Unilever, I think, January.
He was a CFO. He was even worse. He was a CFO. So, he had a double negative, Dutch CFO.
And we met him, and he asked us to put together a program for his leaders because he had come to Medtronic and seen the purpose when he was working for Procter & Gamble as president.
Is that where it came from? Okay.
And he had come to Medtronic and seen the purpose. So he asked us to come in and would you put together a program on purpose for me and my people? And of course, Nick, I compliment you because I didn't have the resources to do that myself. You did. You put it together. I was trying to be a professor at Harvard Business School, and so you put it together. We taught together in that program. You've carried it on to large numbers of people. I don't know how many have gone through it now, but it started out like 15 people per session.
Yep.
But it really evolved into purpose because Paul was really thinking loud and clear and about what is the purpose of Unilever, and he cited sustainability. And I remember we did a seminar for what he called his CEO forum for all the senior executives. And I got up and said, you know, sustainability is Unilever's true north. That's what you're really working on. That's your essence. And he asked everyone in the every employee to say, how do you relate to that? You know, how do you relate to climate change? How do you relate to make a difference? How can we use sustainability as a competitive advantage, not as a mantra, not as an advertising slogan, but how do we make it work in Vietnam? How do we make it work in Poland? So we have products there that are more sustainable products, and they help people in a meaningful way. And he turned a consumer products company into a purpose-driven company.
You know, I think that's true. I mean, you know, you've worked with a lot of different people in a lot of different industries. So, you know, when we look at Medtronics, people could say, well, that's easy because, you know, you guys, by definition, it's pretty direct connection to saving people's lives. But when you look at a Unilever where they make soap or ice cream, it's a little more, it's like you really got to work at it to try to figure out what is that deeper purpose. Now, I think Dove was a wonderful example because they changed from being a soap, literally as a sort of its purpose, to being about women's self-esteem, which I thought was really powerful. And they've been able to actually turn that into an economic engine as well. So it's been both and instead of either or. Been,
well, if you think about dishwasher detergent or, you know, laundry cleaning, you know, is that sustainable or not? What's it pumping and what's it doing to the water supply? And water is going to be a big issue going forward. And what are we doing to the water supply? Another one, by the way, who was really great at that is Indra Nooyi PepsiCo, who recognized the obesity problem and the direct connection with diabetes. And she wanted to, even though she had products like Pepsi-Cola and potato chips that were, you know, not necessarily the healthiest product, she created this whole healthy foods thing at PepsiCo. And I give her a lot of credit for really promoting that and creating literally hundreds of new products that were good for your health. So she had fun for you and good for you products. Still does.
Exactly. Actually, they had a line called True North. Didn't they create a line of products called True North that was?
Yeah. And she said, you know, this is our true north. This is my true north of getting healthy foods out there for people. And she got a lot of criticism, but she's very tenacious and she stayed with it.
Now, I want to go back to you for just a second, because what people don't realize that I think is important is that you were CEO and chairman of Medtronics, and you took it to 60 billion in capitalization. At the end of that, your ability to leap to another CEO role would have been guaranteed. Mm-hmm. And for some weird, strange reason, you decided to give that whole life up and decide to basically become an academic or a teacher. And I'm just curious as to what went through your head, because that seems like and you were very young. So what went through your head that would have caused you to make that huge leap that was of deep uncertainty as to whether you would be successful?
All my life, thinking about being so, I had studied CEOs, and I find with almost no exception, CEOs after 10 years don't do as well as they do in the first 10. And I said, you know, because a high-tech company needs a new, fresh look at it every 10 years. Any company does, in my opinion. So it could be 12 years, but I put a 10-year limit on being CEO. I told the board I have no contract, I don't want one, but I'll tell you the maximum I should serve is 10 years. And I was 48 at the time, so true to that, right to the day, May 1st, 2001, 10 years of the day, I turned it over to my successor. And I literally walked out of there. I was chairman of the board, but I literally walked out of there with no plans, nothing to do, and rented a house in Provence with my wife, invited family and friends to come. I'd never been able to do that, and just reflected. And I started writing a book that, as I told you, never got published. And with all my ideas about it from Medtronic and purpose. And it did, but that's okay. And that probably was premature anyway. It's probably good way too soon. But it got me thinking about what I want to do next. And so I thought about everything, going to government, international trade, a lot of areas of interest of mine. I didn't think about being CEO somewhere else. I didn't think about going into private equity like all the rest of the CEOs do. What I decided was, if I can work with people, leaders who are going to make a difference, leaders have the greatest impact. It's like taking a stone and throwing it into a pond and watching it ripple. So if you can impact a leader's life, they can go impact thousands, tens of thousands of people. Some cases, like in Mary Barra at General Motors, who's one of my students, hundreds of thousands of people. And if you can do that well, the impact of that is staggering. So I decided to try my hand at teaching. I went to Switzerland, taught in 2 institutions over there, found out I loved it. I was offered some deanships. I didn't actually want to be a dean and try to corral cats and get them into the box, or have them hate me because I wasn't an academic, or raise money, which I'm terrible at. I'd rather give money away than raise it. But anyway, nonetheless, I decided I want to work with students. I want to work with leaders. I want to work with the real leaders, both MBAs coming up, just starting their careers, and executives throughout their careers, all the way to CEOs. And so I came back and I did that for a year and a half. I loved teaching in Switzerland. Spent a stage at Yale for 4 months as executive in residence, and then came to Harvard Business School, and it was like a godsend to me. And it's been the perfect kind of resting place for me from which to, the launching pad from which to do the work I've done.
Well, I just think it's such a, you know, in some ways it feels to me like that's such a beautiful expression of purpose, or your purpose. Because you talk about wanting to have an impact on leaders who then impact many people. So it's that having that single point where you work with somebody that then impacts many, many people. And my organization's purpose is to wake up those who wake up the many, which is in some ways kind of similar.
Oh, it's the same thing. That's great. But if you think about it, I went to Medtronic, we had 4,000 employees. Today, the company's got almost 100,000. But when I walked out of there, I left my purpose behind. You know, I've still got this little medallion, but that's not my purpose. And I decided, you know, I got to turn it over to them, to let them run it. They're doing a fabulous job carrying this forward. How can we impact lots of companies? And so, and if you start with the CEO, you have, as you know, like Paul Foman or Indra, you know, you have a lot of impact if you work with the CEOs. But you can't always do that. Sometimes there are MBAs who grow up and have huge impact. So my purpose changed, is my point. I had to find a whole new purpose. And so I decided.
What do you think your purpose became as you were working on it? As you were sitting in Harvard Business School teaching to MBAs, how did you feel? What did you think your purpose had gotten morphed to?
Well, Harvard Business School has a purpose to develop leaders who make a difference in the world. And Dean Kim Clark, who invited me to come there, was very big on this. And it had been cast aside before he came, and he talked about it all the time. And the current dean, Noria, actually taught authentic leadership with me for a number of years.
Exactly.
And he is huge on this. So I found an alignment. See, if you can't find an alignment, you know, I didn't really find that alignment at Yale. If you can't find that alignment with the institution's purpose, you're in the wrong place.
It's a huge message for everybody who might be listening about just, you know, how do you find a stage worth singing your song on, and finding one that's an appropriate,
well said,
deeper
purpose. Stage worth singing your song. I had sought that throughout my business career and tried to find that right place. And it took until I got to Medtronic and I was in my 40s. So it didn't, for me, it didn't happen like out of the box, first job out. You know, it took me a while to find that place, that stage, as you're calling.
Well, it's interesting because I think, you know, your Honeywell journey was about doing everything that you thought that actually didn't matter, but you had to do that to discover what really did. And I think one of the interesting things about purpose is that we discover our purpose by when we don't feel connected to our purpose is as important of a means of finding it, because it's only then that we actually go looking for it, which is, I think, one of the challenges around many of us in the journey is you can't lead from it if you don't know what it is, but most of us have to struggle in the desert for at least not 40 years, but a little bit of time in the desert.
Right, exactly.
So one question is
But
this.
that's critical, by the way. That's not, we shouldn't pass that over too quick. That struggle is
Say more.
really essential. I remember, Viktor Frankl wrote a famous book, Man's Search for Meaning, after he got out of the Nazi concentration camps. Came out right after the war in '46. He talked, those who know their why can bear any how. In other words, if you had, the how's not easy. You're going to get beaten up by the stock market. You get, these things are not going to go well. Your company's going to have a problem. But if you know your why, you stay with it and have that tenacity. I remember back to Paul Pullman 2 years ago, and I wrote a case on this. The Group 3G in Brazil tried to take him over through Kraft Times.
Yep, exactly.
And that was bye-bye Unilever's purpose if that happened. In fact, bye-bye Unilever. It was just going to be a group of 31-year-old Brazilian finance guys running the company. And Paul fought like hell to preserve that. And I've heard the story from his people that unified, 125,000 people came together around, this is our purpose. And so if there's ever any question about it, that brought everyone together. And so I think sometimes you need a wake-up call, Nick, for that to happen.
So speaking, purpose, when you and I started working together 15 years ago, purpose was one of many topics for which I don't know if we realized what although we saw it at the top of it's define that true north or the North Star, we were still sort of playing with it. And today, we hear so much stuff. When you go to the World Economic Forum events the last 2 or 3 years, purpose, purpose, purpose. And what's your sense for why purpose has gone from being just something you needed to have to being so much more prevalent?
Well, a good example is Larry Fink, who runs the world's largest financial fund, $7 trillion. And he said, you have to make money to survive. But any company that doesn't have clarity of purpose will not be sustained long term. And I think he's right. And so companies are now realizing you have to, but it also has to do with the key factor we've overlooked in companies. We've ridden on the backs of our employees. We've ground them down. Do you think anyone could live on a minimum wage of $7.25 an hour? Are you kidding? It's ridiculous. Right. And so we've realized we got all these consultants and middle managers running around instead of focusing on how do we motivate the people? And the people are not motivated by $3.91 a share. They're only motivated by a sense of purpose. And so your job as a leader is to convey that to them. I think CEOs, the people we're talking with today that come to our courses at Harvard, and people I work with independently that are really waking up to this. Yes, that's my job as a leader, to convey that sense of purpose. We'll let the finance people worry about the numbers, but my job is to convey that to people every day. And just about the time you get sick of hearing yourself saying it is when people are starting to think that you're serious. Took me a while to convince people of Medtronic, that I really got it,
Yeah. Okay.